call this meeting of General Laws Subcommittee number 2 to order. I would ask the clerk to open the roll for attendance. All right, we've got 8 here, and we have a quorum. I'd like to start with Delegate Taylor's 1845, and while she's getting ready, I would just remind the patrons, if you've got substantial amendments or substitutes, get those to our staff quickly and early, not the day of committee, preferably. So work on that. Delegate Taylor, your bill, 1845.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and to you and to the members of the subcommittee. This afternoon, I'm presenting HB 1845. This bill serves to provide vulnerable populations with a layer of assistance from local DSS departments. It requires landlords to send information to local DSS departments if the tenants who are about to be evicted are a dependent child younger than 18 years old or a mentally or physically incapacitated elderly person. These DSS departments can then decide which programs these persons can benefit from. There are many cities around our great Commonwealth that unfortunately have high eviction rates and vulnerable populations. Petersburg is one of those cities. Landlords are already responsible for reporting evictions to the Department of Housing, asking them to send information to the local DSS departments, and is not an onerous task. It is a simple extra step that may provide our vulnerable populations with the support they need.
Thank you. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of the bill? Who is your speaker online, Delegate Taylor?
Tresca Wilson-Smith.
Okay. Ms. Smith, are you there online? Okay, we're not seeing her. Is there anyone here to speak in opposition to the bill? Please come forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Tommy Herbert on behalf of the Virginia Apartment Management Association and our sister organization, the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington. First, we appreciate the intents and the concerns of the delegate, and we certainly appreciate what she is trying to get at. Unfortunately, there are several provisions of the bill which we believe would violate the principles of fair housing, and further, there are great questions about how housing providers would actually know who to serve this special notice to. We look forward to working on the bill in the off-season, but we would respectfully urge you to oppose.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, Christy Marrow with the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and I want to thank the patron for meeting with me about our concerns about this bill, and I really do want to work with her in the off-season if the bill doesn't proceed this year. We share some of the concerns of that Mr. Herbert spoke about. Primarily, I know because I was a child welfare attorney for some time with the Poverty Law Center, and from speaking with social services just last week about this, that they do not have the type of resources that the delegate is hoping to direct these tenants to. There are, however, organizations throughout the state in various communities that get things like Virginia Eviction Reduction funds that would be appropriate places to refer these tenants to. What we are really concerned about is referring these tenants somewhere where they will not be able to receive help. We think this just delays their opportunity to get assistance from the appropriate places and can also discourage them from reaching out to anybody at all. So we really appreciate the intent, but we think this is just not the right vehicle.
Members of the committee, my name is Victoria Horak. I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Justice Center, and we represent low-income tenants. I echo what Christy Mara from the Poverty Law Center said. We appreciate any effort to get tenants who are being evicted services, and so we thank the delegate for that. However, we have concerns about this being the mechanism, and we would urge this body and the General Assembly in general, if you would like to get services or support for tenants, to do it in the form of rental assistance. So we oppose the bill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and the committee. Erin Corman with the Realtors. We echo the comments that Tommy Herbert made. We understand the intent and the motivation and definitely sympathize, but have concerns that this bill violates fair housing. So we do respectfully oppose.
Thank you. And I don't think your witness has gotten on the Zoom or the virtual link, and so, Delegate, we'll give you the final word if you have one.
No, I appreciate, as we like the association's representative, like they said, we did speak, and looking forward to working with them in the future to make this work and to make housing this issue easier on vulnerable populations.
Thank you, Delegate.
Mr. Chair, a motion at the appropriate time.
Delegate Coiner.
Mr. Chair, I would move to gently lay this bill on the table. Speaking to that motion.
Go ahead.
I appreciate the intent, and I agree the mechanism can be worked on. I would disagree a little bit with some of the opposition said. I don't think tenant that rent assistance is the only thing that is most important. There's a lot of underlying issues, which is I think what you're trying to get at, that sometimes doesn't allow someone to have that rental money, and sometimes we can get caught in the cycle of just providing rent assistance without addressing their underlying needs in addition. So thank you for your willingness on the intent, and we hope you are able to work on it in the off session and come back.
All right, there's a motion to gently lay this bill on the
second.
table. And a second. I'd ask the clerk to open the vote. Thank you, Delegate Taylor. This bill is laid on the table 8-0. Good luck working on this. We'll take up the next bill. How about Delegate Adams, House Bill 1519?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. There is a substitute.
Substitute's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, substitute's before us. Tell us what the substitute does, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The substitute adds additional language to line 66 that community managers must provide 30 to 90-day notice before the date the association must give notice to stop auto renewal, not 30 to 90 days before the effective date of the auto renewal. And this language continues throughout the bill.
Okay. Anybody here to speak in favor of the bill?
Well, I haven't discussed the bill in totality. That was the substitute part. Could I?
Let it rip, Delegate. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. The bill before you requires that the manager of any HOA or CIC that has an automatically renewing contract provide the board with a formal notification of that renewal between the 30 and 90 days before the deadline. The board has to notify the manager of their intent to terminate the contract. It also requires that such notice shall be made prior to every renewal period. This issue was brought to our attention by an incident where a CIC board issued a notice of contract termination to their community manager, whose contract automatically renewed. However, the management company rejected the termination notice because the board had not told them 60 days prior to the contract's renewal date. The board was not able to terminate the contract until the following year. Current law does not require management companies to provide the association with notice of automatic renewal, and this limits the ability of the association to be adequately informed of the upcoming contract renewal and terminate the contract agreement within the required time frame. This is an especially sensitive issue when newly elected association boards may or may not know the terms of any existing management contracts agreed to by previous boards. We understand this is a recurring issue across the state since many HOAs and CICs enter automatically renewing management contracts with community managers and management companies. I hope it will be the will of the committee to vote yes for this bill.
Any questions from members of the committee at this point? I was just excited to hear from the public on this bill. I'd like to hear from anyone in person that'd like to speak in favor of House Bill 1519, if you would come forward. Seeing none. Any opposed to the bill? All right. Come forward. Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, Nicole Brenner with Reed Smith on behalf of the Virginia Association of Community Managers. The members of our association manage more than 600 communities and 500,000 units in Virginia. Our contracts do auto-renew, but we consider them at-will contracts that can be terminated without cause at any time with notice. Without auto-renewal, we cannot continue to collect dues, manage the finances, or other contracts for the association, and this association would not be covered by our insurance. We think this is an unnecessary interference with the freedom of contract, and it would result in an overly burdensome notice and requirement on our members. We ask you to oppose the bill.
Delegate Bulova.
If I could just ask a quick question, because I wanted to understand kind of the words that you were using. in terms of considering yourself at will. And so I guess, does the contract actually say that it is at will? Or is this just something that is considered at will? And I guess there's a big difference with respect to the legal standing of the contract based on whether it's actually in there or not.
I'm saying we consider them at-will contracts because you can cancel them with 30 or 60 days notice without cause.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Coiner.
Having reviewed one of these contracts recently, I would suggest that's not accurate. One of the HOAs that had this happen to them, in order to terminate, you had to provide them with the reason for termination and give them 60 days to fix it. So it put the HOA in a continuous cycle of giving notice of termination, allowing the manager 60 days to remedy it, and they constantly utilized that remedy period. So the HOA could never terminate. They were stuck in a continuous cycle of poor management. So that is not correct for all contracts that are negotiated.
Understood. Next speaker, please come forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Pia Trigiani with the Community Associations Institute. My practice is representing common interest communities, primarily in Northern Virginia. Our contracts in Northern Virginia, and I shared this with Delegate Coiner, are typically do contain without cause provisions, which means that you can terminate the contract without cause. That the source of that requirement was secondary mortgage market lending requirements that were also captured in the underlying foundational documents for these common interest communities. So when looking at these contracts for our clients, we typically see in the Northern Virginia marketplace provisions which do allow for termination, even though they may contain automatic renewal provisions. As Ms. Brenner was speaking to, they can be terminated, and it's something we see. And so we don't see that issue in Northern Virginia at all. And in fact, one of the benefits of the automatic renewal provisions is that the parties can contract for longer-term services. Right now, we have a real challenge in the community association world with getting good management. And transitioning from one management company to another is not always an easy task. So one of the things we like to do is try and preserve those relationships as best we can. I would also point out that an appropriate fix may be to require this by regulation. The Common Interest Community Board regulations address some of the contract terms that community association, Common Interest Community Association managers are regulated by that agency, the CIC, Common Interest Community Board, which is within the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. And the regulations contain provisions that, for example, require the disclosure of the license number. So that may be an appropriate fix.
Question for the witness. How many members are on the Common Interest Community Board?
11.
11. Thank you. Delegate Bulva.
Hey, Pia. Sorry. I do have a question. So I guess following up on Delegate Coiner, I guess I'm okay with the idea of either notice before automatic renewal, or the flip is genuine being able to go ahead and at will go ahead and fire a company, without having to have a reason. I guess my understanding is that there are contracts that don't have either of those. And so I wanted to kind of ask about how do we fill that void, right? And so it's one or the other. I don't really mind, but I think we're looking at how do you make sure that they have one or the other, and that you don't wind up in kind of that loop situation that Delegate Coiner is talking about.
I expect that Delegate Coiner, I suppose there are contracts out there that do that. I'm fortunate in my practice not to see it, but you could require a notice requirement. The notice is the least burdensome alternative, really, but there are a lot of existing contracts out there which would still have an issue, I think. Are you requiring, the notice requirement would be in the contract, I believe, right? I believe that's right. Yeah.
Less burdensome than 60-day cancellation.
A 60-day cancellation, right? In my mind, the automatic renewal is obviated if you have the ability to get out at will, the description that Ms. Brenner gave it. And it's not a problem in most jurisdictions. I see it with some. It's always the one bad apple, so to speak.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? All right, we've got a few people that are online, I believe, for this, and so I would ask Ms. Regina if you can admit the first speaker that is now for this.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have Michael Watson.
Mr. Watson, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I just wanted to relay, I recently took over as the president of our local HOA, and of course, we're a community of homeowners who are volunteering to help out and try to keep our community operating in a consistent and enjoyable way for our homeowners. I think we're very much in support of something like this, where it's adding the right provisions and steps in place to protect, the homeowners and the volunteers on the board. We do our best to try to make sure that we're paying attention to all aspects of contracts. But I think you understand these are generally folks that may not be dealing with a lot of these things every day. And it makes it really tough to make sure we're catching all of the different, I'll say, potential avenues that we may be sort of stuck in some of the contracts. The community that I'm in now did actually have this issue happen where we were auto-renewed without understanding that we were even up for renewal, even though we have a provision that talks about having, those things that are auto-renewed brought to us. It was just viewed as not applying to the management company contract. It doesn't appear from a layperson's perspective, it doesn't appear that the notice component is an overly burdensome approach for something like this. And I think it does give us a good opportunity, to be able to address performance issues or deficiencies we have within the person providing the contract, the company providing the services. Okay. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. We'll ask the next speaker, Mr. Caudill, if you could unmute, and we're going to admit you to speak, and please keep your comments brief.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and delegates. I apparently got a hold of a bushel of bad apples. I was the president of our HOA. Just a very bad situation. We had problems with them. I actually met with the owner and the developer 8 months prior, put them on notice that we were not happy with them and we needed to see some improvement. Their renewal was in August, and in June, I had our attorney, who is set to speak soon, send them a letter saying we did not wish to renew, and to which we got a response back that it's already renewed. Read your contract, it's 90 days. Basically we had sent a letter saying we did not want to renew, so we got a letter back from their attorney threatening to sue us. So there is no at will in place. There is a clause in there that any issue we have, that we need to provide them with 60 days notice and give them 60 days to remedy the situation. And we're caught in a spiraling cycle that just keeps going on and on and on. You give them one item that they're not doing well, they step it up on that and then drop the ball on another item. And then 60 days down the road, it's right back. And there's no getting out. We're now stuck with them till August of this year. And the one thing I hope you delegates will recognize, the HOAs are run very much like you guys. Half of us, everybody serves the 2-year term. Half of them are elected 1 year, and half of them are elected the next year. So at any given time, you've got half the people on the board have less than 1 year's experience, and the other half only has 1 year experience. And the management company holds all the cards. They have all our financial records. They have all the contracts. And part of their contract is that they are to manage all contracts. And,
thank you, Mr. Caudill. We understand your position and your support for the bill, and I'm glad you're involved in your community. I'm going to ask Regina to admit the last speaker here.
Casey Crazy.
Ms. Crazy, tell us your name, what your position is.
My name is Cassie Craze, and I'm an attorney who represents community associations.
Great.
And I'm speaking in support of House Bill 1519. In my practice, which is in the Central Virginia area, I have seen numerous situations in which common interest communities were stuck in management contracts that weren't working for them due to the auto renewal provisions, sometimes for 1 year, sometimes for as long as 5 years. In my experience, common interest community managers are often delegated responsibility for contract oversight tasks, including tracking terminations and renewal dates. And this makes sense because association board members and officers change frequently. They're typically volunteers and they have varying levels of experience. The board in place at the time of the auto renewal is often not the same board that approved the contract originally. But this creates problems when the contracted issue is the management contract, since the managing agent has a vested interest in that contract. In my experience, the vast majority of management companies do make sure boards are aware of renewal dates or do allow cancellation at will. But there are a handful of companies, locally at least, that do not. And House Bill 1519 addresses that to make sure that boards are aware of when auto renewals will occur and that they can make a decision on whether they want that to occur or whether they want to terminate the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate, I'll give it back to you for a final word.
In the interim, one of the lobbyists that just spoke wanted to speak again. Is that something you?
Sure. Why not?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I wanted to echo what Pia was saying and answer Delegate Bulova's question earlier. It's one or the other. Speaking on behalf of the members of my association, which I understand is not every management company in the state, we do consider our contracts at will, and they have 30 or 60-day cancellation clauses without cause. That would be preferable to requiring my members to provide notice to 200 associations every year, because it's not 5 years, it's 1 year, if that was something that the committee was willing to consider.
Thank you. Delegate, you have the final word.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the conversation. You know, I think if somebody wants to bring up a different bill at another time, but this is the bill before you, and I hope you'll support it.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? All right, committee operates by motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to report with substitute.
Okay, there's been a motion to report with substitute and a second. I'll ask the clerk to open the roll for a vote.
How do you want to vote? I'll vote it for you. There he goes.
All right. That bill reports 7-0. Delegate, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
All right. Let's see who else is here. Delegate Tran, would you like to present your bill? That is House Bill 2214.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have 2 line amendments I'd like to offer.
Move the amendment.
All right. It's been motioned and seconded to move the amendments. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Can you tell us what the amendments do and then also what your bill does?
Great, thank you. So the amendments start, I believe, on line 18. And so instead of notice on a yearly basis, we'd like to change that to say shall, comma, within 1 year of the transfer of a property, comma, send to every owner of the real property the notice. And then the second amendment, I believe, begins on line 19 and would strike after the word fact and the penalties all the way to the end of that sentence, and instead insert and of the, so that you would notify them of the fact of that their property is in a real property, is in a resource protected area, and you would notify them, insert and of the availability of additional information on the locality's website pursuant to section 62.1-44.1567C. So
I think we all track those, but we'll wait for those to post while you explain the rest of your bill and why you introduced it.
Yes, thank you. But because we're doing this, I won't be able to post that as quickly.
Go ahead.
But thank you. So stepping back, House Bill 2214 is an issue that came to me from several of my constituents. As you may know, parts of the 42nd District is bordered by the Occoquan and the Potomac Rivers, and I have constituents who own homes along these waterways, and they, in some cases, have lived there for decades, in over 20 years, but did not realize at any point in between that their properties were under a resource protection area, which has some additional requirements before you're able to do any type of development or fixing on your property. My constituents, because they were not aware, and through their different projects, some became aware and went through the process to reevaluate whether or not their property should be covered. Others had continued to do the work of making these upgrades to their property and then find themselves to be in tens of thousands of dollars in debt in order to rectify those violations to the RPA, and are vulnerable to criminal penalties as well. That was not their intent at all. And so,
Delegate, if I could interrupt you,
yeah.
the Chesapeake Bay TMDL has criminal penalties in it as well?
The localities can have either put forward either civil and or criminal penalties.
Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
That's okay. And so what we realize is, that the consequences to the Chesapeake Bay could be long-lasting. And the consequences to a homeowner who's, put their life savings into purchasing this home could also be long-lasting as they're dealing with these financial and other issues through the locality. So at its heart, this bill is about letting homeowners know what their property entails and if they're covered by a resource protection area through notice during the purchasing process, as well as an affirmative disclosure, as well as requiring through the amendments that we just put forward today that localities notify the homeowners within a year after they purchase the home, to make sure, hey, this is what's up with the property you have, so that you're aware and you know what you need to do to stay in compliance, and ultimately making sure that we maintain protections for the Chesapeake Bay, which we know is an essential natural resource, an economic driver, and a national treasure.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Delegate Robinson.
I don't know how many properties this involves as far as the localities notifying them because I guess at some point they'd notify everybody, right, that's up and down the Chesapeake Bay by us putting this in place. And so, because it's not specific to your locality or whatever.
Yes, ma'am.
So is there a fiscal impact on this of what a locality, we don't usually do fiscs for localities, but what would be, I would think it'd get costly for localities to make sure they contacted all the properties.
So that's an excellent question. I think that was a concern Delegate Bulova had raised to me too, to be mindful of that cost. And so we think if it is with the change that you have to notify basically when you're a new homeowner, right, when there is a transfer and sale at that point. And so, but I will give you the example that Fairfax County has implemented an annual notice. They started in 2021, and they mail out a little postcard. So it doesn't have to be, an expensive mailer, but I think there is a cost of postage. But we hope that by limiting the number of notices, so just that one time when you first become the owner of that property, that will lessen the burden.
Thank you. Delegate Coiner.
So what about localities who don't send these out timely? Is it a defense for a property owner if you don't receive a notice? You violate something in the RPA or one of the environmental regulations, and you can use as a defense you did not receive notice from the locality?
I don't know if I think I would need some assistance.
I have my lawyer hat on, and that's what I would argue. I'm just saying, as a lawyer, that would be my first argument. If they did something incorrect and I was defending what someone had done, I'd say, well, the law says the locality is supposed to provide us. So I was just wondering if you had thought about that issue, about whether or not notice would be a defense. I have a locality that fails to send tax bills out. So,
Thank you. I think let's take some testimony. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of the bill? All right, anyone here to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, looks like we got one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erin Corman, and on behalf of the realtors, we respectfully have to oppose this bill, as we always oppose these types of mandatory mandatory affirmative disclosures for homeowners and sellers. The Commonwealth of Virginia, as a caveat emptor state, has been for years, and that's why we use the buyer beware form. This information is on the form to make the buyer aware that this could be an issue in the property that they're purchasing, and that they should do their due diligence before moving forward. And so, again, respectfully, we have to oppose the bill.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Delegate Bulova.
Mr. Chair, just a couple of thoughts for kind of the good of the order. It's right now with respect to RPAs, they are in the buyer beware, right? And they are in some plats. And so it wasn't until more recently that we actually required that plats had these things on there. And so for properties that were sold or platted, a couple years ago, they're not going to have any indication when you're going ahead and looking at that to go ahead and see that there's an RPA. So I can go ahead and tell you, that as you are going through your, property selling process, that buyer beware often gets ignored. And again, in this state, it's at the peril of the property purchaser, not to go ahead and do that. We have made exceptions, though, for items such as stormwater management facilities when a property owner has a positive requirement to have to manage something, or that it is going to materially affect the value of their property or the use of their property, right? And so for stormwater management facilities, takes up a piece of your property, you're going to have to go ahead and maintain that in perpetuity. Quite honestly, a resource protection area is not all that much different, right? And so it's not a nice to have, but by state law and by state regulation, it is saying that you are limited to very few things within that resource protection area. So you cannot clear it, you can't put a shed in it, you can't put your kids' playground in it. And so it is really important for a property owner to be able to understand that. And so to me, this is one of those things, where you get the proactive disclosure and then a letter that follows up. Quite honestly, it's going to save the locality some enforcement money in the long term, because when you do have violations, it's going to take a staff person having to go ahead and work hours and hours with that property owner to go through enforcement, where if you had a disclosure statement or a proactive, hey, you've got one of these on your property, and remind you, you're going to avoid those kind of very, very uncomfortable and costly situations. So anyways, I understand from the realtors, that 9 times out of 10, these things belong in the buyer beware. These kind of situations, where you are actually limiting the use of property probably rises to the level where you would want to have this proactively disclosed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. I'll say this briefly. This is a great example of when we do multi-state compacts that are going to have decades worth of impacts, we need to be careful about how we create liability for our Virginians. And I think we all want the Chesapeake Bay to be cleaner, and look forward to coming and swimming in the Aquaquan one day. Probably not anytime soon. But I appreciate your bill, and if there's anything else you have to say, you have the last word.
No, I really appreciate Delegate Bulova's comments. I think, particularly if you are, like I said, you're putting your life savings into purchasing a property, and you're looking forward to, living there and raising your family in that community. And I think it's really important to know upfront what you can and can't do in that property. I have, we're looking at several constituents on a stretch of road right now who are in a situation where they're caught up in that cycle of having to do the repairs, and it costs them additional money and time and a lot of frustration about the whole situation, right? And so I think we can save a lot of that time and money for our constituents and still protect the Bay. I hope you vote in favor of the bill.
Thank you. Bills before the committee.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion.
Delegate Corner.
I move to gently lay the bill on the table.
All right, it's been motioned to lay the bill on the table. Is there a second? Second. All right, it's been motioned and seconded to lay this bill on the table. I'd ask the clerk to please open the roll. Okay, that bill is laid on the table on a 4-3 vote. Delegate, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's take up Delegate Van Valkenburg. You ready, Delegate? we'll take up your 1725 first.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So 1725 is about preventing emotional support animal fraud. We saw a version of this bill last year that passed through the House, and then the Senate they sent to the Housing Commission, where we worked on it over the summer, if you will. And so this is getting at the kind of bad actors, these kind of companies, especially online. You see a lot of this on TikTok, actually, where they tell you how to do this fraudulently, to get a fraudulent documentation so that you can get an emotional support animal. And so the bill in front of you today makes it an offense under the Consumer Protection Act to provide supporting documentation that verifies the need for an emotional support animal if it knowingly provides fraudulent documentation. So suppose landlords or apartment managers find an organization or a company that's doing this, they can work with the local Commonwealth's attorney or the Attorney General to see if the provider's actions falls under one of the prohibited practices, and they'd be subject to its provisions. It will hold fraudulent providers accountable while not inhibiting a tenant's ability to receive documentation, which was a concern that was addressed last year and over the Housing Commission's work. And so it's also in the Fair Housing section of the code, so there's a self-destruct clause if we are in tension. And so it passed out of the work group. I think it's a good bill to hopefully cut down on some of this fraudulent activity that is seemingly everywhere. Since I put this bill in last year, I've gotten insane amounts of texts of the TikTok videos of the people showing you how to purposefully create fraud. Who knew? Not me. Not on TikTok, at least. So that is the bill. I think there might be people to testify. But
Great. Are there any questions from members of the committee? All right. Seeing none, I'd ask those who are in favor of the bill to come forward. Tell us why.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the subcommittee. Tommy Herbert on behalf of the Virginia Apartment Management Association, as well on behalf of our sister organization, the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington.
Well,
we would respectfully. Oh, ma'am, I apologize.
just a deep breath.
Oh, thank you. We would respectfully ask for you to support this bill. As the delegate has previously stated, there was another version of this bill last year, which we were very grateful to work through the Housing Commission process, and we are grateful to report that we are aware of no current opposition to this. It is a problem that is endemic to our members, and we hope that you will support the bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Zach Lemaster with Gentry Law Consulting here on behalf of the Northern Virginia Apartment Association for the reasons previously stated. Now I'm messing up. We also support the bill. Thank you.
Erin Corman with the Realtors. I'm going to go really short. We also support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Randy Grumbine representing Virginia Manufactured and Modular Housing Association. We too support the bill.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Troy Garrett with the Manufactured Housing Communities. We also support the bill.
All right, great. Anybody in opposition to the bill? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion.
Delegate Coiner.
I move to report.
Second.
It's been a motion and seconded to report this bill. I would ask the clerk to please open the roll for a vote. All right, way to stay after it. 7-0. Your bill reports. Thank you, Delegate. You can start with 17. What is your other bill?
35.
35. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Do you want me to go over it all together again? How do you want me to tackle this since this is the one that we talked about?
Yeah, it's been a busy week. Let's do a quick refresher course for the committee.
Okay, and then this is a question before I start for Ashley. I believe the bill before us is as amended, so we don't need to make that motion again, right? I just want to confirm that. Okay, she said yes.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the body. House Bill 1735 provides a couple technical amendments to the Statement of Tenant Rights and Responsibilities Disclosure Requirements. So this is about confusion that's been created in the courts when a tenant doesn't sign this form, right? This form gets provided when the landlord and the tenants are are coming together over there to meet to talk about their obligations and sign paperwork. And what has happened is we've seen that oftentimes people don't sign it or refuse to sign it, and then there's no record, and so it goes to the courts, and there's been a lot of confusion within the courts, and so this seeks to alleviate that. And what it does is it says that the tenant will create a record if they fail to sign it or refuse to sign it. It eliminates any confusion on the part of the landlord about when to provide the disclosure, particularly when it involves lease renewal or updates, and that is accomplished by adding a section to the disclosure that instructs the tenant to check the website periodically for updates. The amendment, if you remember, was mostly clarifying language, but also added one sentence, quote, "The form shall be current as of the date of delivery," unquote, and that was so that you did not have to update and resign the form every time the date changes. And so this is about trying to clear up confusion in the courts around this form, and so that is the bill.
Well stated. Thank you for the summary again. Is there any questions from members of the committee? And you all feel free. I can't see my request screen, so if you have something, just raise your voice. All right. Anybody in favor of the bill that would like to speak?
Mr. Chairman, I'll keep this short. We do support this bill. It does close a loophole in the system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Erin Corman with the Realtors. We also support the bill.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Troy Garrett with Virginia Association of Housing and Community Development Officials. We also support the bill. I'd like to thank the patron for putting this in and everybody that worked on it. Thank you.
Tommy Herbert with the Apartment Managers. We support the bill.
Anybody here in opposition to the bill?
Mr. Chair, I have a motion.
Delegate Coiner.
I move to report as amended.
Second. It's been moved to report as amended and seconded. I'd ask the clerk to open the roll for a vote. All right, Delegate, your second bill report 7-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Have a good day.
Thank you. All right. Let's take up Delegate Watt's Bill 1558.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1558 deals with predominantly the self-managed homeowners associations. While it would be available to all CICs, it deals with the language that allows a resident for compensation to provide services, specifically bookkeeping, billing, or record keeping if they're bonded. The problem arose when, because of IRS looking at a definition of employee, and the fact that the CIC board guidance document many years ago found that the word employee used under 2 rather than under 4, which I'm addressing in my amendment, would be interpreted by IRS as being a full employee. And so in absence of that, the clarification that I am providing on lines 22 and 23, you have the situation where a homeowners association might be subject to payroll withholding, workers' comp, unemployment tax. Notice that in my language on line 23, you're presumed to be an independent contractor. There's nothing keeping from the board from treating that resident providing these compensated services as an employee. But absent the board's decision to do so, the person providing the services, as the bill provides, would be presumed to be an independent contractor. Notice also on lines 40 and 44 and 45, council in drafting this bill made sure that there would not be any construed to be in conflict with misclassification of employees under our tax laws.
Any questions from members of the committee? Delegate Coiner.
Mr. Chair, and I don't know if we have a question for you or if you want to phone a friend for our community association folks, but I thought back when we changed some of the regulations and laws around associations, if you had different parameters around if you were an employee of your association versus hiring someone independently. So I understand your tax concern, but I wonder if this doesn't put people in a different light in terms of regulations, professionally managed versus being an employee of the HOA. In my memory, it's been 20 years that I've been going through these sections, so it may be that my memory is just wrong. I see a phone a friend helping.
I'm sure I will always appreciate a friend, but if I can start with my answer. So I guess full disclosure, our family has been very active in our self-managed. 270 homes were still self-managed. And we have some good people in the community that, as required, are bonded to provide these services of bookkeeping and billing record keeping. And notice again, it's very tight to just those services. And so the compensation that we offer them is a max of $5,000, and they have to be a resident. But rather than, quite frankly, overburdening a goodwill resident with doing it all for free, we thought the token $5,000. When the CIC certification, management certification was put in, the fact that management could pay for lawyer services, et cetera, was put in without being part, if I'm not using the right terminology, I apologize, without being certified as a resident manager. So you could have certain services that you pay for. And this just was something I added, I believe, about 2 years later, after we got into all of the good regime and structure of exactly what a professionally managed CIC was to put in this number 4, this proviso, that you could also, however, if you are still volunteer management, to have a resident perform those services for a fee. And again, the clarification is it is to be presumed that you're an independent contractor, not an employee.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? All right, let's hear from the public. Anyone here to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone here to speak in opposition to the bill? All right. No public comment on this one. Back to the...
This was brought on behalf of a constituent, but I did not ask them to come and testify.
Okay. Back to the committee.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to report. Clerk, would you please open the roll for a vote? All right, Delegate, that bill fails a report on a 4-3 vote. Thank you for bringing it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of the committee.
Delegate Price, let's take up your bills next. You've been waiting. And on this one, at the request of Delegate Torian, we are going to incorporate his bill 1830 into your 1651. Is that correct, Bill? The identical bills? Let's see here.
Have not memorized the numbers yet. 52.
All right. I'd like to have a motion to incorporate House Bill 1830 into 1652 at this time.
So moved.
All right. It's been moved and seconded to incorporate. If there's no objection, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. That bill is incorporated. Why don't you take 1652 up first?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. You have seen this before. This is a provision that we enacted during COVID as a safety net, and I have been very transparent about my desire to make it permanent because of how well it went during COVID in keeping people in their homes. I don't want to belabor the discussion because we've had it so many times, but I do want to raise a few points. Evictions are actually on the rise, and if we have not hit it yet, we are on target to hit more evictions than the year that we got embarrassed in the New York Times for having 5 out of the top 10 cities across the nation with the most evictions right here in Virginia. And we have had a bipartisan effort since then to try to prevent evictions and and help tenants and landlords. And so this is, again, an opportunity to continue what we have seen is working. I will remind you of the negative impacts of evictions on people's physical and mental health, on children's physical and mental health and school readiness, and just the impacts of being unhoused and how it radiates into every facet of the of someone's life. So the last point that I'll raise is that I think when we talk about evictions, we always assume that it's like thousands and thousands of dollars that someone has in unpaid rent, and that's why they're getting evicted. And that just is not the case. There are some instances where it might be $100, and it's an amount that if the person was given the opportunity to get to their next check, they could cover that amount. And so that's the rationale behind the 14 days. We've seen it work in other states. It worked in Virginia, and that's why I'm still fighting to make this a reality here in Virginia for the renters.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any questions from members of the committee? All right, let's hear from the public. Anyone here in favor of the bill, please come forward. Tell us why.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Christy Marrow with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. And we thank Delegate Price for sticking with this. We think this is probably the single most important thing you all can do in terms of legislation to lower our eviction rates. We are looking at a situation where, as Delegate Price mentioned, we're getting close to where we were in 2018. And I want to underscore, it isn't just some of these tenants who would be able to escape eviction or avoid eviction if they could have until their next payday. It's almost 50%. Back in 2018 and 2017, 45% of the judgments for eviction across the Commonwealth were for amounts of rent that were under $1,500. They were under the median monthly rent for the state. So we have to believe that and that was about 30,000 Virginians each of those years. So if they had an extra paycheck, thousands of people, probably not all of those 30,000, but I think we can say thousands of people would have been able to pay their rent before the eviction case was filed, before the extra fees of the court costs and the attorney's fees were tagged on, and they would have prevented those evictions. So we ask you, please support this legislation.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. Jennifer Spangler, Mental Health Self-Advocate. The Money and Mental Health Policy Institute found that individuals who have depression or anxiety are significantly less likely to recover if they are in financial difficulty, and individuals with no history can develop mental health challenges due to financial burdens. I live well with bipolar disorder. It takes 2 nights of compromised sleep to put me at risk for mental health crisis. With only 4 days, I may require health care, which will not help me resolve the issues. Increasing the mandatory period will prevent mental health crisis. If you are committed to improving mental behavioral health care for Virginians, I ask that you support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Ty Mallory, representing the Virginia NAACP. And for all the reasons stated, we are in support of the bill. This bill is really going to help a lot of families. Thank you.
Victoria Horak. I'm here from the Legal Aid Justice Center, and we represent low-income tenants. We thank the delegate for bringing this bill. This is a crucial bill for our clients who are facing eviction. As Christy Mara said from the Poverty Law Center, this is the opportunity for tenants to get to another paycheck. It's also an opportunity for them to get additional rental assistance. It can be really hard for tenants to secure that additional rental assistance within a 5-day period, even if there are organizations with the money willing to help them. I'll also say that this actually makes the pay or quit time period conform to public housing residents. This would actually just make all of the time periods the same, which would avoid confusion for some tenants who have, if you're a voucher holder, you get 5 days. If you're in public housing, you get 14. So this would make it clearer for those tenants. And additionally, this prevents tenants from having to go to court. And just to really quickly go through how the court process is harmful for tenants, it's an expedited process. So once the tenant is sued, they're immediately incurring court costs and attorney's fees. And also the first hearing happens within 21 days. So it's not a lengthy court process in which they can stay in the home. They are really rushed through, and they have to miss work. They have to try to find an attorney, and they risk getting a judgment. Even if they're able to pay later in the process, the cost will be much higher, and they risk having an eviction judgment on their tenant record, which could prevent them from getting housing in the future. So for all these reasons, we support the bill.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Brian Koziel, Executive Director of the Virginia Housing Alliance. Our members represent the entire affordable housing continuum, from tax credit developers to homeless shelter providers. And there is a strong correlation between evictions and homelessness. And our point in time counts for the state increased for the first time this past year in over a decade. And so anything that we can do to slow down the eviction process and relieve pressure on our homelessness system, we support. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sheila Herlihy with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, and today I'm also speaking on behalf of the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. Both organizations do strongly support this bill. The Virginia Interfaith Center, because all communities of faith recognize that housing our neighbors is essential to our values, and the Virginia Coalition of Immigrant Rights, because as folks who are new to this nation, learning the rules is a challenge. A 5-day pair-quit period can be confusing and is often detrimental to people getting their feet under them. So a 14-day period allows for a lot of community resources and individuals' resources to come into play. Thank you. Please support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Isabel McLean with Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia. And we support this bill because we think it will have a real impact on housing stability statewide. Several of Home's housing instability clients tell us that they would have been able to pay the rent themselves if they'd been given time to get another paycheck. So we ask that you support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone in opposition to the bill would like to come forward?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Tommy Herbert on behalf of the Virginia Apartment Management Association, as well on behalf of our sister organization, the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington. We appreciate the patron and we appreciate the situation that she is trying to address. However, we would assert that this piece of legislation hurts housing providers while there is already a remedy in place for residents who are in the situation of needing one more paycheck to get current. We in Virginia have what is called the unlimited right of redemption here, which means that from the day you become late on your rent all the way through the entire court process and up until 48 hours before a sheriff shows up to actually execute that eviction, you as a resident have the ability to pay down that balance to zero and the eviction will be canceled. We did hear some testimony regarding the 21-day court timeline. Our members report that that timeline is unmet in many localities across the Commonwealth, and especially over the course of the last few years. Complying with the 14-day notice exacerbated already existing court backlogs, as we have heard from our members. We understand the situations and we look forward to other solutions. However, we urge you to please oppose the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Zach LeMaster here on behalf of the Northern Virginia Apartment Association. We also oppose the bill.
All right, it's back to the committee. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none. Delegate, you have the final word.
Yeah, just 2 quick points. I do want to push back a little on what we just heard about the right of redemption. The way that the law is about the right of redemption now has been improved because of a bill that I carried. What was not mentioned was that with the right of redemption, that is all of the court's fees, all of the fees for the sheriff. So it's even more than what the unpaid rent was. This is actually an easier process and a quicker process than right of redemption in order to get all of the rent, the back rent. So that's one thing. The other is this has worked. We've seen it work. And so the opposition, I understand that it may not be convenient, but we are looking at someone's inconvenience versus cities like mine who are being overwhelmed in their social services department. Eviction after eviction after eviction, some for non-payment of rent, some for condemned housing, all of the issues that I've been working on. There's nowhere for these families to go. When I was presenting House Bill 1650, I know that you heard about families that were in their cars on the coldest nights in December. And so this is a proven way that we have seen that helps keep those families in their homes, and I hope that you can support it.
Delegate, I have a question. How long typically in your area does it take to get an unlawful detainer heard by, in a court?
I'm sorry, I do not have that information, but I could get you that
I
information
mean,
for my area.
in my limited experience in landlord-tenant law, it typically takes a month or two before an unlawful detainer hits a general district court docket. And so, trying to decide if to move the 5-day notice provision to 14, at least in my experience, it's been months before any of these ever get heard and get, put to a judgment by a judge, which would give a lot of time to the tenant that's in prospective danger of eviction to come up with that money. And so I was just curious if from your neck of the woods, different dockets, I'm in a country county, and so, we're not as full as, say, Newport News or Portsmouth, and so just wanted to see what your thoughts were there.
What I would offer, someone might have the actual number, but what I would offer is that extending it to 14 days actually prevents the writ of eviction from even hitting someone's record. Once you have that process on your record, trying to find housing after that current housing, if you are evicted or if you're trying to get a job, that can hurt you in financial decisions that you need to make in the future. This would prevent all of that.
Follow-up question. If you exercise your right of redemption as a tenant, you pay your, delinquent balance to your landlord, before a writ of eviction is entered by a judge, that would not go on your record, right?
So with the right of redemption, the way that we worked on it, it actually gives you up until 2 days prior to when the sheriff is scheduled to come and execute the eviction. It's already on your record.
So even post-judgment.
Even post-judgment. Mm-hmm. But again, that is a new amount of money that is added to the back rent that you would now owe, and that is a higher hurdle for these families to meet when, if they had a few more days to meet the $100 or $200, before you add on the additional fees, that has become an insurmountable hill for most, and they're not able to use that right of redemption because of the additional fees.
Understood. Any questions from other members of the committee? All right. The committee operates by motion.
Move to report.
It's been moved to report and second. No other motions. Ask the clerk to open the roll for a vote. Delegate Brewer.
A substitute motion?
There's a substitute motion.
I'd move to lay the bill on the table, and I want to speak to that.
Okay, Delegate Brewer.
Out of respect for the patron, we talked earlier, and we've seen quite a bit of bills this year that are in this code section, and I think, and I want to say this, not just the patron, just stakeholders too, is when we took this down to 4 units, and we talked about this a little bit, is we have a ton of people that are truly small landlords that are being affected every single time we dig into this code section. And I really think probably next year we need to come back here. We need to take one more good stab at this, sit down with stakeholders and be done with it for a while, because we're asking people to keep up with the law that are not the big boys, as some of us would say, that are just everyday mom and pop landlords that are just trying to get by. And so I really, really think that as we gently lay this on the table, we should open a conversation next year to do something a little bit bigger, talk about it as a group, and then be done with it for a little while. So with that, I would make a motion.
There's a motion to lay on the table. There's a second, so now it's non-debatable motion. I'd ask the clerk to open the roll. All right, Delegate, that bill is laid on the table on a 5-3 vote. You have another bill, 1651, if you would like to present that bill.
Yes, so I'd love to start this conversation off with, I brought all of the stakeholders to the table to get to this bill. This is not the original bill that we started off with last year. This is the bill where we ended up after intense conversations. So if you will imagine with me, someone that works during the day is sitting at their computer in the evening trying to find a place to live, and they are entering in non-refundable application fee after application fee after application fee, to the point of one of my constituents paid $700 in application fees, and that is before actually landing a place to stay and before security or background checks and for security and additional months worth of rent. We are finding that it is an obstacle to affordable housing, even for those that have the money that won't get behind on their rent. They still can't even get into the place because they have so much money spent on non-refundable application fees. What this solely does is state that folks need to know ahead of time what the process should be, so that if 14 people have signed up to apply for this unit, the 15th person was never going to get that unit is not spending their hard-earned dollars on application fees for apartments that weren't even open. And so this is a disclosure notice to help people really be able to know what the process is ahead of time, what would the fees be, so that they can make the decision as to whether or not they should apply or not.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? All right, seeing none. Anyone here to speak in favor of 1651, please come forward and briefly state your position.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Christy Marrow with Virginia Poverty Law Center, we support this legislation. We thank Delegate Price for bringing it, and we particularly want to thank Aaron Barton with the Virginia Association of Realtors, and Bisma with AOBA, and Tommy Herbert with BAMA for working with us last year to get this into a really nice position. And I hope you will support it.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bisma Ahmed with the Apartment and Office Building Association and the Virginia Apartment Management Association. We thank the delegate for bringing forward this important issue, and please ask that you support. Thank you.
Victoria Horak with the Legal Aid Justice Center. We support our tenant clients would be really benefited by this, especially those with housing choice vouchers. They need to know what the criteria is for apartments before they pay hefty application fees, because their like funds for application fees are so limited. That's not part of their voucher. So even when they have housing subsidies, they can't actually move because they can't afford all the application fees. So they need to be able to target their housing searches to places where they can find stable housing. So we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Aaron Corman with the Realtors. We just want to thank the delegate and all the other stakeholders who worked very hard to get this bill so that there was peace in the Valley, and we urge you to support it.
Sheila Herlihy with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy and Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. We also support the bill and appreciate the delegate for bringing it.
Thank you to the chairman of the committee. Thank you, delegate, for introducing this bill. Tayi Mallory with the Virginia NAACP, and we support the bill.
Isabel McLean with Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia, and we support the bill because we believe it will remove a significant barrier to rental housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, seeing none, back to the committee. Any questions? All right, bill's before us.
Move to report, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to report. Clerk, please open the roll. All right, all votes are cast. That bill reports 6-2. Delegate, thank you for your time in front of this committee. That's 3 bills. I'm looking forward to 10 next year.
There is one more coming.
One more. Sneaky last couple of days, Bill. All right, we'll look forward to see what that is. We've got about 5 bills left, and I'd like to keep cranking. Let's see. Delegate Bennett Parker, please come forward. Present your House Bill 1732.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I have line amendments to offer.
Go ahead. If we have a motion on you can tell us what those line amendments are, and then we'll get a motion.
Thank you. These amendments are the result of working with the realtors. They remove the mandatory time frame on the payment plan and clarify that a landlord can proceed to file for eviction in the case of a missed plan payment or a current rent payment.
All right, now that everybody's thoroughly confused, tell us what your bill does, and then we'll come back to the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill would require that landlords with more than 4 units offer tenants who owe no more than 1 month's rent a chance to pay their debt through a payment plan before taking them to court for a judgment. I have other things to say about the bill, if I can continue, or do you want to?
Please.
Thank you. So in both 2018 and 2019, 45% of the eviction judgments entered across Virginia were for amounts less than the statewide median gross monthly rent, or about $1,200. In each of those years, approximately 35,000 eviction judgments were entered for amounts less than $1,500. As we heard previously, an eviction judgment remains on a person's record indefinitely, and can prevent that person from obtaining safe, secure housing for years after the judgment is entered. Even after the tenant pays off the judgment, and it can appear on the third-party tenant screening reports landlords use to decide whether or not to rent to a particular person. This is especially true in times like ours when there's a housing supply shortage. During the pandemic, eviction rates were low because landlords were required to offer payment plans to their tenants. Some may suggest that these payment plans were not effective in preventing evictions, but when payment plans fail, they fail because the amount owed by the tenant is insurmountable, often exceeding $5,000. We can do better at giving hardworking families a chance to pay their rent before eviction is necessary. These are tenants who had their car break down or an unexpected doctor's visit and need a grace period to catch up. By providing a clear and manageable pathway for tenants to pay relatively small rent debts, and by keeping their debts low, by avoiding the addition of court costs and attorney's fees, the payment plan in this bill will actually make it more likely that landlords will collect their money. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope members of the subcommittee will support the bill.
Thank you. And Delegate, payment plans are already allowed under current law, right? If a landlord wanted to enter into a payment plan with a tenant to recover delinquent rent, they could do that currently, right?
I believe that is correct.
Okay. It's in front of the committee. Any questions? All right. We're slowing down on our questions, but we'll hear from the public. Anyone here to speak in favor of the bill? Y'all are getting your exercise today. That's good.
Mr. Chairman, Christy Marrow with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. We thank the delegate for bringing this legislation. And I think you've heard a lot of statistics today, a lot of things to support how beneficial this legislation would be for thousands of Virginia tenants. The ability to have a payment plan for these tenants who owe only 1 month's rent, who have just stumbled on an extra bill, like a bill to fix a car, like a medical debt, but something that they did not budget for that eats into their rent payment. They would be tremendously helped by this legislation. It would enable a landlord to start getting payments right away so that the very following month that the payment was not made, the landlord would get the full amount of the rent plus some additional amount toward the payment plan. We think it would go a long way toward helping Virginians have better access to good housing when they move, because thousands would avoid having that scarlet E. Even the mere filing of an eviction case can cause someone to have limited choices when they go to rent their next apartment or house. So we ask that you support the legislation. Thank you.
I'm really glad that the scarlet letter wasn't written about eviction. All right, next speaker, come forward, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Councilwoman Aaliyah Gaskins from the City of Alexandria, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing forth this legislation. Faced with rising housing costs and inflation, I think you've heard that many low-income Virginians are just one hardship away from eviction and, in the worst cases, homelessness. Alexandria courts are seeing as many as 150 eviction cases a day, with approximately 25% of those ending in default judgment against the tenant. Summons are filed as early as 6 days after the payment is late, even though, as you've heard, many low-income folks work often multiple jobs and need just a little more time or 2 pay periods to secure the full rent. What we need is a win-win solution, one that allows Virginians to remain in their homes while also ensuring that landlords are getting paid in a timely manner, not just paid the month rent that is due, but the back rent that is owed. And so this bill does that. It also makes sure that the terms of the plan are negotiable, and it outlines a remedy if the tenant fails to pay the exact amount or if they fail to enter into the payment plan. Everyone benefits from housing stability. Our families benefit by having a safe place and a stable place to raise their children. Young adults benefit by being able to stay in their homes while they're going to work and stay on their feet. And older adults benefit because they're able to age in place. And so it is for those reasons that I ask that you support this bill, and I hope that the subcommittee votes to pass it on to the full committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Victoria Horak from the Legal Aid Justice Center. We support the bill, and we thank the delegate for bringing it. Just in this past month, I represented a client who got behind on his rent. His hours went down over the course of the winter. He couldn't pay 1 month's rent. He only owed $690, and there was no obligation for the landlord to negotiate. His hours had gone back up. He fully could have entered into a payment plan, but unfortunately he couldn't sort of redeem with that one lump sum to pay everything he owed, but he certainly could pay over time. Tenants in this situation are just at the mercy of their landlords in trying to repay the amount, even though they have the money, so we support the bill.
Afternoon, Sheila Herlihy, Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy and the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. Both organizations, again, support the bill because the need for housing is enormous, and we want to see our communities stay in their homes and have access to the payment plans to maintain that stability over time. Thank you. Please support the bill.
Brian Koziel with the Virginia Housing Alliance. For all the reasons more eloquently and previously stated, we support the bill.
Isabel McLean with Housing Opportunities Made Equal Virginia, and again, we support for the reasons previously stated. Thank you.
Ty Mallory with the Virginia NAACP, and for all the reasons stated, we support the bill. Thank you, Delegate.
All right. Is there anyone opposed to the bill that wants to come forward?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Delegate Robinson.
So when I look at this bill and I look at line 100 to and through 101, and it says that you can only use this one time during the period of your rental agreement, and you have 6 months to pay. It seems to me that yes, the person gets to stay in their home for a lot longer, but the landlords could go a long time without seeing payment, because at that point in time, if there's that next crisis, unfortunately, to that person, where do they go from there? What will happen at that, when they've utilized it once, they're still behind, they haven't been able to quite make that 6-month payment plan, and their rent is still accumulating. What happens at that point in time to the tenant?
So, Mr. Chairman, to the delegate, I would first clarify that the amendments are striking the reference to the 6-month payment plan and leaving that discretion to the timeline of the payment plan to the landlord. And then secondly, I would say that the bill would, if a tenant had used the payment plan once already during the term of their lease and then fell behind again, the landlord could proceed to file evictions on the 6th day as is allowed.
All right. We had someone to speak in opposition to the bill. If you'd like to come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bisma Ahmed with the Apartment and Office Building Association and the Virginia Apartment Management Association. We certainly appreciate the intent of the bill. However, we saw that mandatory payment plans were largely unsuccessful during the pandemic, especially for those tenants who were already financially hurting. And so we saw a 60% default rate during that time, especially when resources to help tenants were an all-time high at that point. And I just want to state that, like you said, Chairman, we can already use payment plans on a volunteer basis. So we want to keep that. We want to make sure it stays an industry practice, especially for tenants with strong rental history, and keep that discretion to use payment plans to housing providers. Thank you.
Thank you. The bill is back before the committee. I don't see any questions. Okay, we do have some amendments. I don't think there's been any motion on those. Can we get those properly before the committee?
Second.
All right, been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the amendments are adopted. Delegate, we'll give you the final word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would reiterate that when payments plans fail, they fail because they are large amounts. This is a very targeted bill addressing when those amounts are 1 month or less, and the significant number of evictions, 35,000 per year, where that amount is a low amount. It's an important bill to support hardworking Virginians, and I hope you will support it.
Thank you, Delegate.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion.
Delegate Coiner.
I move to lay the bill on the table.
Second.
All right, it's been motioned to lay this bill on the table. And second, I'd ask the clerk to open the roll for a vote. All right, Delegate, that bill is laid on the table 4-3. Thank you for presenting it so well. Next up, we've got 1614, and Delegate Williams-Graves is not here, so we're going to pass that bill by for the day without objection. No objection. All right, 1614 is passed by for the day. We have also House Bill 2098, Delegate Bulova's bill, at the request of the patron. That's also going to be passed by for the day without objection. No objection. 2098 is passed by for the day. And I broke my own rule. Today I put in a substitute right before the committee. And so I'm going to pass by HB 2235. That's going to be on the docket next week. Are there any other bills that we need to take up?
Mr. Chair, I have a bill that I did get my substitute in time for.
All right, if you got your substitute in, we'll take Delegate Coiner 1627 up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a substitute to bring before the committee.
All right. Is there a motion on the substitute?
So moved.
All right, it's been motioned and seconded. Substitute. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right. Any opposed? Substitutes before us. Delegate Coiner, tell us what your bill does.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The substitute before you, the bill seeks to make changes to the procedure followed by the CIC Ombudsman for processing notices of final adverse decisions. Currently, a member of an association or citizen, after getting an adverse decision through the association complaint process, can escalate that decision to the ombudsman for determination of whether or not the association violated a common interest community law. This bill would give the ombudsman the power to refer any potential violation of the POA or a condo common interest community law directly to the CIC board for evaluation. The bill also adds language requiring any repeat violation as determined by the ombudsman that occurs within 365 days of the ombudsman's initial determination of a violation to be referred to the CIC. So what we kept seeing were repeat violations that weren't being elevated. So it gives the ombudsman more teeth and the ability to do that. The bill would clarify that when the ombudsman is directed to contact the association with respect to a notice of final adverse decision, she must also contact the association's governing board and common interest community manager if applicable. Finally, this was brought up at the Housing Commission. We talked about whether or not there was data tracking the ombudsman number of violations and complaints and items being elevated to the CIC board for evaluation. So it adds an additional data point for tracking of that. It's our hope that this bill will clarify the ombudsman's powers while making sure that everyone at the association is notified of any potential violations being evaluated by the office.
Delegate Coiner, I've got a question for you. Does this bill do anything to limit the power of a common interest community to take up a violation or a notice of a violation themselves before issuing it to the ombudsman?
No, it does not.
Okay, good. Are there any questions? Delegate Bulova, looks like you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess for Delegate Coiner, I think one of the things that you said, and I just want to kind of make sure I understand situations where this would happen. So rather than going to just the ombuds, that they would be able to go ahead and automatically pivot over to the board. And maybe if you could explain.
It gives the, Mr. Chair, if I may, it gives the ombudsman the ability to send it over to the board, to elevate it to the board, put some more teeth in the ombudsman's ability to do that. And it also adds more teeth around repeat violations and the ability to elevate those.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Bulova.
I guess follow-up question, just to help refresh my memory in terms of how that works. So right now, the ombudsman does not have the authority to go ahead and send it over to the board, and this would go ahead and establish that linkage?
Correct. Okay. To send it directly over to the board to handle versus it staying in the ombudsman's, yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Bulova.
I guess the question is I guess what circumstances do we envision where it wouldn't want to first be handled in the ombudsman's office, where you would go ahead and pivot and just toss it directly over to the board? I guess that was where I was going.
So I think we have some folks who can probably give examples that would be in practice. That would be helpful if I can phone a friend on that.
Yeah,
Delegate.
I was really enjoying that ping pong. All right, let's hear from others. Who wants to speak in favor of the bill? Come forward, Aaron, please.
I just want to thank the delegate for bringing this bill at our request. And if I may answer Delegate Bulova's question, so The ombudsman does now have the power to refer to the board. It's just buried in the regulations, and we just wanted to make it very clear that by putting it into the code, that the ombudsman could, at her discretion, if there was a violation that they found severe enough, they could pass that on to the CIC board to be evaluated. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So not necessarily new authority, it's just that we're being a little more transparent about where that authority comes from. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Corner.
I thought on the repeat violations, though, it's a shall. So that's what I was clarifying. We have a lot of those same that keep coming back up. And so that is a shall that is different than today.
That is correct.
Delegate Corner, how many is repeat? More than one?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, we got it for the record. Next speaker, please come state your position.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Delegate Coiner for bringing the bill and for working with us on some refinements that we asked for. So we're in support of the bill. We think it gives a good opportunity for the Ombudsman to push along regulatory violations. There are some regulatory violations that will go straight to the board, but if it comes through the internal complaint process, this just gives the added authority to the Ombudsman to get them there.
Are there any to speak in opposition to the bill? Seeing none, it's back before the committee.
Mr. Chairman, move to report as the substitute.
Second.
All right, substitute has been moved and seconded to report. I'd ask the clerk to open the roll for a vote. All members had opportunity. That bill reports 7-0. Thank you, Delegate Coiner, and thank you all for hanging in through this meeting. We've got significant number of bills and sounds like some more on the way. So prepare for a long housing subcommittee next week. We're going to try to finish this docket. If we don't get through it, we'll keep rolling. You guys, thanks for all the work. Stakeholders, stay on, everybody, and let us know what you need. Thank you so much. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn the committee. All right, we're adjourned.